You're here on The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up within the half hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky hopeful about Trump's impending meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. National Guard troops take on the streets of the capital after President Trump's concerns over crime spinning out of control. Plus, former Malian Prime Minister arrested after being charged with corruption. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Berlin to hold talks with European leaders over the upcoming meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. In the midst of all of that, he has also been able to speak to President Trump and ending the call with a promise of support from the U.S. President. He told a press conference a while ago that he told President Trump that Putin is bluffing about the impact of sanctions and wants to occupy all of Ukraine. He says he would like to see further sanctions on Russia if the Kremlin does not agree to a ceasefire. Now, asked about conditions he'd be able to talk about swapping territories with Putin, the Ukrainian president said the success depends on the result of the negotiations, adding that he's very positive after today's phone call. And regarding his call with other European leaders in Berlin, the German Prime Minister Friedrich Merz, who stood alongside President Zelensky at the press conference, said European countries are doing everything they can to help set the agenda for the meeting between Trump and Putin on Friday. Friedrich Merz also says it is important Ukraine is at the table in peace discussions with a ceasefire that is needed. He says Europe and the U.S. will have to put more pressure on Putin of movement towards a deal. If a deal is not made, the Ukrainian president expressed his gratitude to the German chancellor and to all partners working towards peace in Ukraine. As for the U.S. government, Trump's meeting with the Russian president is being viewed as a fact-finding meeting rather than an opportunity to negotiate a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce was explaining this Tuesday night. She also defended Trump's decision to welcome Putin on American soil after the failure to achieve a peace deal before the previous ceasefire deadline.
That Secretary Marco Rubio spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov. We have that the fact that Sergei Lavrov, again, in a phone call with the Secretary, regarding preparation for the upcoming summit between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, both sides confirmed their commitment to a successful event. I can also tell you that it was President Putin who called to make this arrangement as well.
Do you anticipate that Ukraine's Zelensky will be invited?
Well, I can tell you a few things the president has said. As I'd mentioned when I opened, that it was Putin who suggested this meeting. It is something that also my colleague Caroline Levitt discussed a great deal just a little bit ago at her briefing. And I think that that's important to know, that the president is viewing this, as she described, as something that was fact-finding in a way to see exactly what was possible. I do also want to bring to you some of his comments, which you may not have heard, regarding his commitment to our European partners and to Ukraine and President Zelensky. We know at this point, he said that this is really a feel-out meeting. He said, I'm going to meet with President Putin and we're going to see what he has in mind. And if it's a fair deal, I'll reveal it to the European Union leaders and to the NATO leaders and also to President Zelensky. I think out of respect, I'll call him first, being President Zelensky, and then I'll call them afterwards. And if I may say, lots of luck, keep fighting, or I may say, we can make a deal.
And how unique and strategic is the choice of venue for this meeting between President Trump and President Putin? Alaska was once a part of the Russian Empire in 1867. The U.S. bought it from the Tsarist regime for $7.2 million, which would have been $156 million if that transaction was being made today. Historic buildings remain in Alaska, and Russian Orthodox churches are active in some 80 communities. Indigenous peoples such as the Yupik and Chukchi have lived on both sides of the Bering Strait for centuries and have maintained family, cultural and trade ties despite the formalization of the U.S. border with Russia. Before University of Alaska Fairbanks professor Brandon Boylan, Alaska's deep historical ties make it a fitting venue for the high-stakes peace talks.
Alaska plays a very special role in U.S.-Russian relations, starting with the Alaska Purchase. So the United States purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. Alaska has also been this pivotal site for both cooperation and conflict between the U.S. and the Soviet Union and Russia. A moment of cooperation was Alaska was really pivotal for transferring warplanes from the U.S. to Siberia. So they were shuttled up through Canada, through Alaska, over the Bering Strait into Siberia as part of the Lend-Lease program. And then early in the Cold War, Alaska was very pivotal for being sort of on the front lines of defense. The thinking was that if the Soviets were to attack the U.S., it would be over the North Pole. And Alaska geographically is the U.S. territory that's closest to the North Pole. And so there was a distance early warning line put up to detect intercontinental ballistic missiles. The military expanded in Alaska. And then at the end of the Cold War, Alaska was pivotal again to kind of the reestablishment of friendly relations between the U.S. and Russia. Alaska was the site of citizen diplomacy, so there were a few of these sort of symbolic activities going on at the time to show the so-called melting of the ice curtain. Now, of course, things soured since the Russian annexation of Crimea, and particularly since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. But when it was announced that the two leaders would meet in Alaska, I really wasn't surprised at all, given how important Alaska is to the relationship.
The U.S. National Guard has arrived in the capital, Washington, D.C., to begin implementing President Donald Trump's plan of fighting crime, which includes a federal takeover of D.C.'s Metropolitan Police Department. The U.S. president had announced Liberation Day and deployment of the National Guard on Monday, invoking the Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. Earlier, Trump wrote on Truth Social that D.C. would be liberated from crime, savagery, filth, and scum. At least 800, beg your pardon, National Guard members and around 850 federal law enforcement officers have been deployed. According to local media, police made 23 arrests overnight. The White House said in a press release that D.C.'s local authorities have lost control of public order and safety in the city, citing recent crime, including the killing of 2 Israeli embassy staff members back in the month of May. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, joins us now. Maria, you are in the U.S. Capitol. Where exactly has the National Guard been deployed?
Yes, you are correct. The nation's capital most recently has had the National Guard. Now, what we must remember, though, is that with D.C. not being a state, there is a heavy and close tie to the federal government. And as you mentioned, the home rule laws that exist. And so the president does have jurisdiction with the National Guard because because of the way in which DC is situated. Now, obviously, this is very new for the District of Columbia. Has there been much change? Nothing necessarily that people have necessarily seen as it relates to their everyday. People are still going to work as usual. People are still going to the grocery store and doing everything they typically were doing previously.
Is there some truth, however, to what President Trump is alluding, that DC is no longer safe and there's a loss of control of public order?
Well, we know that the president during his campaign talked about bringing more control and bringing safety to American cities. We know that metropolitan cities oftentimes are challenged depending on the period that they're in. We know that as a result of COVID, there were many changes within major metropolitan cities as well. We also know the president has discussed safety and security, and so I think where we are, we saw what happened in Los Angeles. We saw with those protests, the National Guard coming on play. And so this is the beginning of what he's calling a 30-day period. And so we'll see how this potentially plays out. This is not the first time National Guards have been in Washington, D.C. This is the first time, obviously, for this administration.
It is indeed. But let's talk about the upcoming meeting with the Russian president on Friday. President Trump has assured the Ukrainian president of his support. How could that impact on the talks?
Yeah, so there's the talks that are coming right here. Alaska, again, is in the forefront. Alaska, where the meeting will be held, as I heard earlier, you talked about kind of the history of the U.S. and Alaska and how the U.S. acquired Alaska. And so this is a mutual point. If you all remember several years back when there was the presidential race, and John McCain and his vice presidential candidate talked about being able to see Russia from Alaska. So it's a very strategic point between the U.S. and Alaska. And so this will be a place that hopefully will allow for, as the president has said before, he'll know the tone of the meeting in the first couple of minutes. And so, and he's looking for this to be a fact-finding meeting, not necessarily a meeting that will lend to the immediate end of ceasefire, but he said he will know the tone very quickly.
And I know that the Ukrainian president, as well as we, will be watching closely developments on Friday. But the White House says the meeting is only fact-finding, as you have rightly pointed out. What would the president be looking for? What are the key points he's hoping that the Russian president will make in this meeting?
Well, we know that U.S. And Russia obviously had very close relationships during his previous administration. We know that obviously with the war in Ukraine, trying to understand the positioning of Russia as it relates to that, especially as it relates to the global economy. We know the economy, tariffs are at the forefront of the president's discussion points with any global leader that he meets with. And so understanding trade relationships, understanding where the U.S. and Russia are looking for a long-term relationship, where they will be moving forward in their relationship, how the two countries, if they will be working together. So I think it'll be multifaceted, along with really understanding and getting some insight into obviously how this war in Ukraine with Russia has impacted the entire world.
And as we talk about, this meeting between President Trump and President Putin, it's imperative we also stress that President Trump and President Putin have been good friends even before now. So has the war in Ukraine perhaps caused a shift in their bromance?
Well, the war in Ukraine, obviously, this is more of a government piece. Whether their personal relationship or where it sits, I think that is, but it's really about what the impact it's having. Obviously, as the president said before, America first. We know there has been heavy investments into supporting Ukraine from previous administrations and obviously the current administration as well. And so really understanding how this can obviously move to ceasefire, as the president has asked for time and time again, and looking to see how the entire world can rally and support the two countries to moving toward an admirable agreement. And so that is going to be what the president is going to focus on. And obviously, I think he's going to look to repair. We know that we've seen other relationships that have been a bit tense, and the president has turned those relationships around. They have taken major U-turns. We thought countries were getting triple-digit tariffs, and they have been reduced and extended the period of time before tariffs would go in place. And so I don't think we would be surprised to see a turning around of some of what has been perceived as tension between the two countries.
Maria, thanks again for joining us to clear up some of these issues and, of course, to discuss the situation in Washington, D.C. We're now in South Africa, where Minister of Trade and Industry Parks Tau has announced a clear and decisive response to a 30% tariffs by the U.S. on the country. Mr. Tau made the announcement at a press conference in Pretoria, saying South Africa has accelerated its diversification efforts in export markets and enhanced competitiveness to mitigate the economic impact of losing preferential trade access.
The recent imposition of the 30% unilateral tariffs by the U.S. on our exports is a significant policy shift that necessitates a clear and decisive response. South Africa has accelerated its diversification efforts of export markets and enhanced competitiveness to mitigate the economic impact of losing preferential trade, preferential trade access. The diversification is a strategic imperative to ensure better resilience of our economy to economic shocks. This is not a plan B, it is a plan A for long-term resilience and competitiveness. We are committed to strengthening our relationship, particularly under the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, to build regional resilience.
Welcome back. Leaders are still reacting to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's plans to expand the IDF operations in Gaza. The New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon reiterating what he said about Mr. Netanyahu, that he's lost the plot. He was making the address at the country's parliament, describing recent strikes on Gaza City as utterly unacceptable and saying Israel needs to heed the global community's call for restraint. Luxon says his government has consistently called for Hamas to release Israeli hostages for unfettered humanitarian aid to enter Gaza and for a ceasefire.
And if so, when will he sanction Israel?
Well, again, those were comments that I made about my personal observations of Israel attacking Gaza City overnight, which was utterly unacceptable. It's what the global community has called for a long time. New Zealand has called for a long time with its partners to say, Israel, you need to be listening to the global community, and that has not been happening. And so that I stand by those statements.
And staying with the release of the Israeli hostages, dozens of retired and reserved Israeli Air Force pilots rallied in Tel Aviv on Tuesday evening, adding their voice. The protesters had released a statement ahead of the rally denouncing the ongoing war, claiming it has come to a devastating cost for Israel, with hostages held captive for 676 days and Israeli global standing unprecedentedly damaged.
Our goals are to get the hostages back and stop the war and reach some kind of political agreement with whoever's there, Hamas and any other parties to the agreement, who will make sure that it lasts.
We are fighting for 2 years against ghosts, really, not really achieving any real achievement, let's say, against these terrorists. What we're doing today is actually killing our hostages. A war now occupying Gaza will cause directly the killing of the hostages, killing of soldiers, Israeli soldiers that will be killed during this operation, and killing, again, thousands of Palestinians that will die as well.
About 10 years now, Netanyahu is a kind of dictator. And all what's going on in Israel is just according to his agenda, and all the collaborators that don't stand up against him. So it's Israel against Netanyahu. And until we remove him from power, Israel has a problem.
And those wildfires in Greece continue to torment the efforts of firefighters who are battling several of them across the country. In the past 24 hours alone, more than 152 new fires have broken out across Greece and thousands of people have been evacuated. Around 4,850 firefighters are engaged in a multi-front battle to contain the flames. At least 3 people have died in Spain, Albania and Turkey, with dozens more, including firefighters, taken to hospitals with smoke inhalation and burns. Temperatures surpassed 40 degrees Celsius in several locations earlier this week, with record temperatures hitting France and Slovenia. And we've been talking about floods in India for a while now. Things are yet to get any better as floods rapidly worsened in Bhagalpur, reaching critical levels and forcing the emergency rescue of more than 8,000 residents from low-lying areas. The floods have submerged buildings, blocked roads, and brought village life to a standstill. 12 districts are severely affected and the lives of more than 1.7 million people impacted by the floods. More than 8,000 residents have been rescued from low-lying and riverine areas using inflatable rubber boats, with rescue efforts prioritizing stranded families and livestock. We'll be back in India in just a second, but in Mali, former Prime Minister Choguel Mayaga has been taken into custody to be detained by the country's military junta. Mayaga was questioned earlier this month over alleged misuse of public property. He is now formally charged with corruption. The former Prime Minister served from 2021 until his dismissal in November of 2024, just days after criticizing the junta for delaying elections. Also, former Prime Minister Moussa Mara was arrested on August the 1st for what the militaries called damages to the state's credibility after expressing support for jailed critics of the regime. Mali's military has been in power since coups in 2020 and 2021. This year, it extended leader General Assimi Goïta's rule by 5 years, despite earlier promises to return to civilian government. The Sakrabile elephant camp near Shivamoga in Karnataka, southern India, marked World Elephant Day on Tuesday with vibrant celebrations that honored these gentle giants through baths, decorations and heartfelt rituals. Camp workers scrubbed the elephants in a nearby river and followed up with adorning them with colorful patterns and ornate decorations. A highlight was a naming ceremony for 2 baby female elephants, Tonga and Chamundi, complete with prayers and traditional rituals that drew enthusiastic crowds of visitors. Deputy Conservator of the Forests highlighted the giants' ecological impact. That's the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.